Hello, welcome to episode 68 of the Yoga Research and Beyond podcast. I'm Ariana Rabinovitch.
And I'm Jules Mitchell. Welcome.
So I'm the founder of Yoga Research and Beyond. I'm also a strength trainer, yoga teacher, and co-founder of New York Stretch, an assisted stretching place here in New York City.
And I teach yoga teachers. I teach them about biomechanics, anatomy, research literacy, stretching, all kinds of good stuff. So happy to be here.
Today, our paper that we have for you is from the Journal of Complementary Therapies in Medicine. The title of it is Pain Reduction, Physical Performance, and Psychological Status Compared between Hatha Yoga and Stretching Exercise to treat sedentary office workers with mild to moderate neck and shoulder pain. And it's a randomized controlled non-inferiority trial. It's from 2023. And this paper was done in Thailand, in Bangkok, at the Department of Rehab Medicine at, I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly, Mahidol University. The first author is V. Kuptnirat Saikul. I'm sorry. But that's
good try. Good attempt.
Yeah, no, I hope so. Those are the main details of the paper. This is my first non-inferiority trial that I've ever read. Jules is going to talk more about what that means in detail, but I think it's cool. It's like they're not trying to say something's better than something else. They're saying, hey, this could be just as good as treating or helping with this. In this case, they're saying Hatha yoga could be just as good as stretching to help people with mild to moderate neck and shoulder pain. They're saying it could be as good as the stretching exercise. And the purpose of it, they're comparing those two things, Hatha yoga and stretching. They're looking at the pain reduction, but also, which I thought was cool, they're also looking at their physical performance and their psychological state from this. And the study was done, they had to do the intervention, either stretching or yoga, once a week for 4 weeks in a group organized class. And then they were asked to do it every day on their own for those 4 weeks. And there was follow-up after those 4 weeks. The types of stretching that they didn't give a lot of detail about what the actual stretches were in either intervention, whether it was the yoga class or the stretching group. There wasn't a lot of detail about what the exercises were. They did provide some photos of what the stretches and poses were, but there's not much information about that. And they give us details about the muscle groups. So for the stretch group, the stretching exercise group, they focused on neck muscles, shoulder muscles, trunk muscles, knee flexors, and plantar flexors of the ankle. Both of them 30-minute class in an air-conditioned room. The yoga class was taught by a yoga teacher who's also a nurse who's been teaching for 20 years. And the stretch instructor was a physical therapist. Everyone in both groups had some reports of pain, no major injuries. That was a requirement. So mild to moderate neck and shoulder pain. And they had to answer a lot of questions throughout the survey, throughout the study, and not all of them stuck with the intervention. It was hard to keep people on board throughout the process, which Jules is going to talk about.
Yeah. Want me to go?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, well, this paper caught my attention. This is one I chose mostly because it's another paper that compares yoga and stretching. And that is a topic dear to my heart because the debate has been going on since I started researching stretching 12, 15 years ago, that yoga isn't stretching. But yet we've got a lot of studies that actually compare the two because they're kind of similar and you get similar outcomes. And when you look at, like here, we had to look at the supplement to see what they were doing because we couldn't find in the description. And I'll touch on that in a minute. But, sometimes they're kind of similar. Ariana was describing to me in the supplement, one of the yoga poses was sitting cross-legged and doing a side bend. Like that is a stretch you might do in a stretch class. What makes it a yoga pose versus a stretch? So anyway, that's why the paper caught my attention. And one of the things I've found just in the history of comparing yoga to stretching or something like that inside of the research is the way the stretching interventions are delivered. It's very common for a yoga class to be delivered in a contained 30-minute, 60-minute group environment. And a lot of times stretching is delivered in a more like do it yourself at home, like do it before activity or in the morning or whatever. And when we start looking at research outcomes, the social aspect, as we know about the biopsychosocial model of pain, right? The social aspect of these interventions, sometimes we think that might actually be the benefit. It's not the stretch itself. It might be the fact that a group is getting together to do stretching or foam rolling has a similar effect as a group getting together to do yoga or go for walks or a group getting together to play tennis or something. So anyway, I think that's what really caught my attention here. Again, not this podcast not being about this is what they studied and this is the results and this is what it means, but really like learning to look at a paper and see what the research tells you about, the state of yoga and the state of stretching. So for me, it was really like, okay, they're asked to go into a 30-minute stretch group or a 30-minute yoga class, and they're all beginners, of course. They're not, they're not, they're untrained in yoga, I guess would be the way that we would use the term. And so there's this social aspect. But then as Ariana said, they had to go and do it at home alone once or every other day. So the other 6 days of the week, they were asked to do it at home alone. So now think of just culturally, and maybe culturally in Thailand, it's a little different. So again, I'm just speaking from my own interpretation. But culturally, like if you were a novice in yoga and you were in the yoga group, how comfortable would you be at home doing your 30-minute yoga practice on your own versus doing a stretch program at home? You know what I mean? Like if I were a novice in weightlifting, I might be more apt to do a body weight program than a weight program because I don't really know. I don't understand. What is this? What is this name? What is this? So I think that in of itself is a bit of a challenge. And I wanted to talk about the adherence. And Ariana mentioned that they had trouble keeping people, but they really only had trouble keeping people in the yoga. So they both started with 75 per group. And at the very end, there were a couple phases of dropouts, but at the very end, they lost 4 stretch people. So they had 71, but they lost 16 yoga people. So they ended at 59. And I'm wondering if it was that expectation to do it at home. I also want to point out that they considered good adherence 4 times a week, one of them including the group. So good adherence was doing it 3 out of the other 6 days a week because they realized like, this is not realistic. It's not realistic to have someone join a study and have them do 30 minutes at home every single day. They're not going to do it.
I'm surprised the stretch group didn't have the same dropout rate or a similar dropout rate. And I like your point that were they intimidated? I could totally see that.
Mm-hmm.
Because yoga, I know a friend of mine just took a yoga class for the first time and he's a strength trainer. And he was just like, what? So he knows the body, but he was perplexed and confused in the class. So I can see how that could happen. But with stretching, the most common thing I hear from people is that they find it boring and that they know they should do it, but they never do. So I'm just surprised that people, I can see how they could feel more comfortable with it. But, that's the number one thing I hear with stretching is they know they should do it, but they never do.
And who knows if they did the full 30 minutes. That's another thing with the self-reporting data. We really don't know unless it's being monitored. I just think of people pleasers. if you joined a study and you were supposed to do 30 minutes of stretching 6 days a week at home on your own, and you didn't, would you embellish a little bit? Would you want to make the study, designers, or would you want to impress them a little bit? So you might say, I did it 3 days a week, but you kind of did it like 2 days a week and you didn't do the full 30 minutes or something. So that is one of the challenges with this kind of research. Anyway, that was really all I wanted to say. I did want to go back on the what they were doing. So Ariana had mentioned what the photos that they offered. In the study, that wasn't clear. Under the methods section, they just listed the body regions that were being stretched, and they didn't say anything about the yoga intervention. So I had looked, because a lot of times in these papers nowadays, you'll get an appendix that shows you all of that. But in the old days, before the internet, you didn't get that information because journals had limited pages because they had to print them and mail them to you, or store them in a library. And so you didn't get a lot of that information because studies had a word count limit. But now with the internet, a lot of times you can find the appendix that will actually outline all of that. And it's not in the paper per se, but there will be a link. So when they were in the methods section writing about it, I was looking for that link. I really was, and I couldn't find it. So I assumed they didn't report it. And when Ariana and I were preparing for this, she said, oh, no, they did. And then it took her 5 minutes to find it in the paper. And it was at the very, very end. There was a link to an appendix. And I'm just sharing that with you because, again, the point of this podcast is to help you navigate the confusing world of research. And I missed it, and so Ariana found it, but then couldn't find it again. So a lot of times you have to dig for that information. And that's just normal.
Yeah. And the photos that they gave, there are no names of the poses or a description of what pose or stretch is doing what. They're just thumbnails of the positions and stretches. And I'm happy that they're there, but it's not as useful as I thought. It's not as much information as I thought it was going to be, which ties into such a common problem with these papers is that, as you always say, Jules, if you want to repeat the study, you need to know what they did in order to properly repeat it. So,
and I'm going to assume, because they were given a brochure, so I'm going to assume, like, if the brochure had actual descriptions and instructions for the poses, why wouldn't they put that in the appendix? So now it makes me wonder, like, were the participants just given a photo and they were supposed to recall the instructions from the class? Or was there like a breath count, how long you hold the pose or the stretch, or, that information is hard to come by.
Yeah. That's right. I forgot that they mentioned the brochure. That would have been really good to have. I'm also curious that throughout most of the paper, they mention Hatha yoga, but then there's one point where they say Thai Hatha yoga. And I was really curious about what that meant. Like if there are certain things about Thai Hatha yoga that could have been, relevant or had something to do with the results of the paper. But you were saying something, Jules, before when we were preparing about the effect size.
Yeah. So let's kind of wrap up with this. So let's just go backwards just a little bit, that this is a non-inferiority trial. So a non-inferiority trial basically means you're trying, and Ariana already said it, but I'll embellish a little bit, that there's a standard treatment and that you're trying to show that a new treatment is not worse, that a new treatment can be as good as, is not worse. So the first thing here is that the assumption is that stretching is the standard treatment for neck pain, right? That's the first assumption. And so that would be something you'd want to go into the introduction and their lit review and see, how they came up with that and what papers they cited. And you can go down a really fun rabbit hole on, how stretching is the standard, intervention. And interestingly, when you look at the measures that they did, they didn't just look at neck pain. They looked at things like the sit and reach test and functional tests and like all sorts of different types of general anxiety disorder questions, quality of life, patient health questionnaires, a lot of different things. So that is kind of interesting and is kind of gets you in the weeds. I think sometimes when studies measure too many things, you kind of forget what you're looking for. And also when you measure a lot of things, something will stick. And so you can be like, you're like, oh, well, but they all pass the sit and reach test. So therefore, so it's like kind of be a little more specific. But anyway, they looked at all that.
Wanted to talk about that a little.
Go ahead.
A little more. Because that was something at first I thought, are they trying to look at too many things here? But then when I think about office absenteeism and the what they're dealing with people with neck pain, there is always or often that they're also encountering issues with depression. And so there are issues with the mental state but the physical performance, I don't know what that really has to do with it.
I think sometimes researchers are like, well, let's just add this test because we're doing it anyway. And it's not really good science because again, something will stick. There's a famous study that looks at eating dark chocolate. And the conclusion was eating dark chocolate makes you lose weight. But they looked at 40 different outcomes, sleep, stress, weight, whatever. And that was the one that somehow by coincidence, the people happened to lose weight, even though it wasn't a study designed to compare chocolate or not chocolate to weight loss. Do you know what I mean? And then it made the headlines. It's like probably the paper that said drinking 2 glasses of wine a day is as good as going to the gym. It's like, how is this study? So that I wonder, why are you throwing all these things in here? Are you just kind of hoping for some good results so that you can get your paper published because publishing is a business. So I don't know. I'm not an expert on all of this. We're just here to share what we as, people who enjoy reading research in yoga and related industries, what we observe when we read these papers and what great learning tools they can be. So thanks for adding to that. Okay. So back to the non-inferiority trial. So we're basically comparing yoga to stretching. So all of the reporting that they did was p-value. They have multiple figures, 5 or 6 figures, pages of them, of graphs with p-value reporting. Now, remember, we've talked about this before and we'll continue to talk about it. P-value is a statistical calculation that tells you the likelihood of you getting the same results if you repeat the trial. So that's what statistically significant means, right? That if you do this again with another subject pool, you're going to get similar results. It's a very valuable, piece of information. So what they reported here was that they had significant results for stretching and yoga, but they did not have significant results between. Right? So there was no statistical significance between them. So that means they both did well in their categories of the measures that they did, from sit and reach to quality of life or whatever. And so they made the conclusion that because they both did well in their categories, that therefore they're both good and one's not inferior to the other. And me as a person who's reading research, I would have liked to see effect size. I would have liked to see a reporting of the comparison between the two. And effect size isn't just the comparison between the two. It's actually the magnitude of the comparison between the two. So it gives you a value between 0 and 1 and tells you how strong and the magnitude is. Are they very different or are they very similar? And Ariana asked me while we were preparing for this, do you generally see effect size in non-inferiority trials? I don't know. I'm just telling you, when I read this paper, what caught my attention? Why did they not have effect size? And so I'm curious. I have more questions. And I think p-value has just become the standard reporting statistic. It's what mainstream media reports on. It's what many journals require. So again, maybe there were only so many things that they could report on with the word count, or maybe the effect size was bigger than it should have been. So they just didn't report it and didn't submit it, because that happens too, and so maybe they just were like, oh, we've got good p-values, so let's just report that. I don't know what happened between the study design, the study implementation, and the study and the writing up of the study and the submission to the journals. I don't know, but these are all things to think about.
Yeah.
You want to say something?
Yeah, it just popped up in my head. One of the limitations of this is that, okay, so you said there are 16 people that opted out of the Hatha yoga program, and we don't know why. What if it was because they had negative effects, and what if, if we had the data from their results, could that have affected all of this negatively?
I think they did report on that. They did report on whether it was an adverse event or not. I would have to go back and look, but generally, let's see. Generally they do report that. So I feel like I saw it.
Well, they reported on a low number of adverse events that, from the people who participated. Overall. But we don't know about the people who dropped out. Like, we don't know what their reason was for dropping out and what the impact of the intervention was on them. So, okay. It's a significant number of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it could have swayed things. Yeah, that was something that they mentioned.
Okay.
From what I remember. But yeah, I think that's cool. I appreciated this study. I like seeing papers that compare yoga to stretching. It's always interesting and frustrating at the same time.
But I learned a lot. I learned a lot reading it. Again, this is like about kind of honing your critical thinking skills, putting yourself in the position of what the researchers have to face. We're here being critical of research, but not being angry at it. Just like it is what it is within a contained experiment. And what can you gain from it? I feel like my knowledge, like there's textbook knowledge and then there's research literacy knowledge, and they really complement each other. And I think you get better at like interpreting outcomes and claims and all of that when you put the two together. And so that's what we're hoping to do on this podcast.
Love it. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time, or you'll hear us next time.
Yeah. Bye.